Hi, everyone. This is Rob Doggett from the International Yeats Society and the State University of New York at Geneseo. And we're doing another one of our Yeats conversations today. I'm here with my friend Joseph Valente. It's good to see you, Joe. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Robin. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to catch up. We haven't seen each other
That's
in a while, not since one of
too
the
long.
summer schools. Yeah.
Too long, actually.
So you are a UB Distinguished Professor of English and Disability Studies at the University of Buffalo, the author of many, many articles and book chapters in Irish studies. People watching this will know some of you, I certainly know several of these books. The Myth of Manliness in Irish National Culture, Dracula's Crypt, Bram Stoker, Irishness and the Question of Blood, James Joyce and the Problem of Justice. And you mentioned to me that you recently co-authored a book with Margot Bacchus, The Child Sex Scandal and Modern Irish Literature, Writing the Unspeakable, which I definitely am going to get a hold of. You've edited a ton of collections. I'll just mention the one that people in Yeats studies are really going to want to check out if they haven't already, which is Yeats and Afterwards, which you edited with Marjorie Howes. And that's got a ton of fantastic essays in there, extremely useful, and I use it in my research a lot. So it's a real treat to get to talk with you. What are you working on right now in your research?
Well, okay. So right now, I just want to. Marjorie and I have done another collection that's just come out. We launched it at the ACES conference in Boston, called "The Irish Revival: A
Oh,
Complex
yes,
Vision,"
yes,
which
yes.
applies complexity theory to understand the multi-discursive, multi-institutional quality of the Irish Revival. Sean Kennedy and I are finishing now an edited collection called Irish Shame.
Hmm.
And my next, and I believe my last, I'm going to say that this will be my last authored book coming, which I have it sort of, I have a lot of it on tape, because the book is going to be called Teaching Yeats, Teaching Poetry.
Ah,
And it's going to be about teaching Yeats, but it's also going to be about how Yeats teaches us how to read poetry, and how you have to you have to know the language of poetry in order to actually appreciate the genius of Yeats. That there's a need to enhance everything by Yeats's motto that when he writes poetry, he's articulating sweet sounds together.
mhm.
And so that's where I'm looking.
I am
I'm talking to
really
Syracuse University Press seems interested in it, so it's going ahead, I guess.
I'm really, really glad to hear that. I have been focusing more and more on my own. I've had a couple of lectures fairly recently at the Yeats Summer School, including one 2 years ago, or last year, actually. And I am very much interested in that question of how we teach Yeats. And I think, and I taught a class on Yeats last year, seminar, and I'm finding myself increasingly drawn to that more emphasis on what Yeats does as a poet, the sound qualities, the kind of language we need to talk about Yeats, and
See,
that.
I believe that as a poet, and that's not may not be true of Yeats as a as a an overall intellectual, someone who's a philosopher, who's a prose writer, who's a politician, etc. But as a poet, I believe that Yeats is interested primarily in in encapsulating and conveying feeling, and understanding
Mhm.
that feeling is a far more complex business than thought is. And I
Mhm.
think that that's the key to Yeats's poetry is about the generation of textured feeling that is propped upon the thought, but is actually more complex and exceeds the thought.
Mhm. That makes total sense to me. In fact, we had a little discussion at the summer school with Meg Harper and Jahan Ramazani and I. At the end of the week, we sat together in our seminar and we talked about the Byzantium poems, and that was one of the ideas with the poem Byzantium, that it's so difficult to understand intellectually, but there is so much feeling, and it registers. Students often register that feeling, even if they aren't entirely clear what is the source and what's generating it. I mean, that poem feels so powerful, and yet if you said like what's it about, it's very difficult to talk about in sort of just straightforward logical terms, rational.
That's right. But if you produce a logical document, then you've, as a reader of a logical document that is strictly a logical document, you will walk away believing that your experience of that document has been contained, has been summarized by the thought. And so I think there's an actual relationship between the ideational obscurity of a poem like Byzantium and the aim of a poem like Byzantium, which is to put the reader in the position of having overwhelming feelings of a non-specific sort, if you like.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking exactly about. Like we have effects and
exactly.
affects, and where do they come from? Where what generates them? And that's part of the real joy of the experience of the poem. That kind of the deepness of the poem. That strikes me as, that seems great. I am going to definitely read that book. It's going to be super useful. I appreciate it. But we're here. We got to narrow it down today. So
sure, we do.
We're talking about an Irish airman foresees his death, and we're going to go into reprisals as well, which poem maybe lots of people are going to know an Irish airman foresees his death. I don't know if people will know reprisals as well. And as we were chatting before this, you said you kind of think of them as poems in a dialogue with each other. So we'll do both of those. But so why I said you could choose whatever you want to talk about, and you came back with an Irish airman. Why did you pick that poem?
Well, I picked that poem, and I'm at the moment in my teaching and in my thinking, I'm kind of obsessed with Yeats's elegies, with the elegy poems, and to be honest with you, probably it is the case that, did you not have a conversation that I witnessed on the poem in memory of Igor Booth and Carl Markovits? I probably would have picked that one, because that one is, I know you did. I saw it. I was like, all right, well, they did that. But I mean, I'm obsessed with that poem. I'm obsessed with Cool Park, 1929, and I'm obsessed with these two poems. And I'm obsessed. These two poems I find really interesting, in part because if you look at a classic elegy, Milton's Lycidas, Shelley's Adonais, these are not that. I mean, in fact, it seems like Yeats wrote that to me. In memory of Major Robert Gregory seems to me to be the kind of classic elegiac gesture. I want to say that these two poems, in different ways, very different ways, are kind of anti-elegies. The one poem, because it's a dramatic monologue of the elegized person who happens to still be alive while doing the dramatic monologue. So it's right. And the other, because it seems to me it's pretty critical. It's pretty critical of the deceased. It's elegiac. The elegiac quality is marinated in a little, in critique and in a little bit of resentment. As we'll get to.
For sure. So, well, we'll have you, if you don't mind, I'm going to share the screen, which is always an adventure. Sure. Let's see if this works out well there. Wow, look at that. It was perfect this time. I'll mention too, by the way, I did a Gates conversation with that hasn't been posted yet, with Adam Hanna on Cool Park 1929. So that's this will.
Oh, I'll look forward to seeing
nicely. That. And and you probably saw the one I did with Stephanie Burke on Cool and Ballet 1931.
I don't think I saw that one yet. I haven't seen all of them. I've been
lots of conversations, lots of time.
Well, yeah, and I've been trying to see the ones that I'm going to be teaching, and I figured that the semester's almost over, and when the semester's over, I'll probably just sit down and go through them all.
I appreciate it. You doing that. They're a lot of fun to do. Really interesting with the different variety you get of different perspectives on these. So anyway, we'll go ahead and read this for us, and then we'll take us through it.
Okay. I know that I shall meet my fate somewhere among the clouds above. Those that I fight I do not hate. Those that I guard I do not love. My country is Cultartan cross. My countrymen Cultartans poor. No likely end could bring them loss or leave them happier than before. Nor law nor duty bade me fight, nor public men, nor cheering crowds. A lonely impulse of delight drove to this tumult in the clouds. I balanced all, brought all to mind. The years to come seemed waste of breath, a waste of breath, the years behind, in balance with this life, this death.
Thank
So,
you.
so one of the things I do right away with this poem when I teach it is point out that it is a poem that moves through 4 quatrains, but the quatrains are crushed together in a single stanza. And I think that speaks to the quality of the experience that's being represented. That is, that there's something very architectural, something studied about what Gregory is saying, but there's also something incredibly single-minded about his move towards this death. And so you get this, you have the separate quatrains, but they are all put together in such a way as to create a single and experience that reflects that single-mindedness.
You know, it's interesting. You think about the Pear poem in memory of Major Robert Gregory, and that one of the things as a kind of classic elegy, it is about his sort of Renaissance man characteristics and this kind of peripatetic sort of ability to go into all of these different areas. And it's a much more wide-ranging kind of poem. And you know,
Right, this poem is so
yeah,
it's so directed.
yeah.
But I think that one of the things I'm really interested in about the poem is if you look at the first lines, I know that I shall meet my fate somewhere among the clouds above. Now, as Helen Vendler, the doyen of close reading, who I revere as much as anyone I've never met, points out, the poem starts on the ground and then it ends up in the clouds, so that he's looking up, clouds above, and then at some point he's in the clouds, right? Okay, so but I want to advance on that. Okay, so first of all, I know that I shall meet my fate somewhere among the clouds above. If you're looking up at the sky and you're reading your fate in it, seems to me interesting, particularly for someone who knew his Shakespeare as well as Yeats knew his Shakespeare, that he's reading it in clouds and not in the stars. And it seems to me that the stars are, right, The Fault in Our Stars, the whole thing in Julius Caesar, the stars are this sort of classical map in the sky of destiny. And what we get here instead are clouds, which seem to me to speak to the kind of undecidable quality, the misty quality, the unsure quality of what's driving Mr. or Major Gregory here. When he moves from there, the next lines and most of the poem is very almost mathematical. A use of anaphor, those that I, my country, my countrymen, combined with antithesis. I do not hate, I do not love, right? No loss, no gain, nor law, nor duty, and it's almost metronomic, right? To sort of emphasize the deliberate, what Yeats would call the prepense quality of Gregory here, right? But, and so everything is balanced, right? Everything is balanced. Those that I fight, I do not love. Those I fight, I do not hate. Those that I love, I do not love. Right? My country is Kiltartan's cross. My countrymen Kiltartan's poor, and their likely end. Right? Everything is in balance. Right? And then at the end, I balanced all, brought all to mind. Right? In balance with this. So balance itself is balanced. There's almost a hypertrophy. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce that word. Hypertrophy of balance. It's like balance is just everywhere, and it is asserted to the extreme. And you even have in those last lines, you even come up with, Yeats even produces a new mode of balance that emphasizes antithesis in the balance, which is the chiasmus. Balance, right? Balance, years, waste of breath, years,
Yeah.
balance, right? And so you have a chiasmus, which is the balance of antithesis structured directly into the poem. And it seems as if, and I want to say it only seems as if, it seems as if what's being suggested here is how fully deliberate, how fully rational, how fully reasoned and thought through Gregory's self-styled destiny is. When he says, I balanced all, brought all to mind, that line itself is so balanced. You can't deny that he's brought all to mind, that he's a perfectly balanced mind, right? And it refers us back to all of the things that he's negated as causes, right? All of those, nor law, nor duty, nor public, right? He's negated. It really feels like he's thought of everything, right? Right? He's thought as broadly as he could think about this, right? Okay. And here is what I feel like is the heart of the poem. The heart of the poem is where that doesn't work. And the heart of the poem is drove to a lonely impulse of delight, drove to this tumult in the clouds. Now, I want to emphasize a couple things about this. I want to emphasize the fact that we've had a series of lines that have been galloping along nicely in iambic pentameter. And then, boom, we get drove, initial stressed syllable. Right? And so that the drove, it's not only that it means drove, it sounds like drove, it has the impact of drove, right? Drove is, and it gives a sense of compulsion, of something beyond what Major Gregory has thought. He's driven here. You know, there's something compulsive about this. And if you go back,
one thing, Joe, real quick, one thing that's interesting on that too, and I'm thinking about when I've read that with students and the inflection I put on it. It's interesting too with the a little alliteration there and the enjambment. A lonely impulse of delight drove to this, and that's part of that compulsion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right? And you're absolutely right. And also it's and this is something that Yeats. I think people need to read this about Yeats. The way in which Yeats balances different modes or different instances of alliteration against one another. Okay, so if you go back to In Memory of Con Markovitch, just if I could just make this point for a second. Table and talk of youth, right? Table, right? And all the right, table and the talk, folly and the fight of the fight, right? Right, folly of the fight and table and the talk are the same, rhythmically the same, and they're obviously in contest with one another, right? And they're just in two separate stanzas. But what I'm suggesting is that Yeats's thought about what the sound is going to be and how the sound is going to be organized exceeds the ordinary bounds of what we think of. So we think of, okay, alliteration here, but we don't think that alliteration there might be bouncing off alliteration somewhere else. At the end, once again, I digress, but at the end of Cool Park, right, 1929, dedicate, eyes bent to the ground, right? Well, dedicate rhymes with what? It rhymes with the word at the beginning, meditate, right? And it is meditation. He's telling you eyes bent to the ground, right? Your dedication is your meditation. Your meditation is your dedication. So in this case, the dentals, delight, drove, play off against the liquids, nor likely end could bring them loss or leave them, right? There's a pattern of liquid flow that is then interrupted by this alliteration that you point out of the dentals, the delight, drove, okay? So what is a lonely impulse? we got to think about this. How can an impulse be lonely? Can an impulse be lonely? We can have impulses that are of loneliness. That doesn't make the impulse itself lonely. How is the impulse lonely? I think it's lonely like this. It is an impulse that cannot be properly socialized, cannot be properly shared, because it cannot be reduced to concept. It cannot be reduced to idea that can be communicated. Right? It is an unshareable impulse, an unsocializable impulse, an impulse that is secret to anyone who encounters Gregory, because it may even be secret to Gregory himself. Right? Okay, so now think about this. Okay, a lonely impulse of delight drove to this tumult in the clouds. So in addition to that drove, you have a spondy, impulse, and a spondy, tumult, and they are linked by assonance, right? By the UL sound. And so the tumult in the clouds, this is mirrored what is in fact a tumult in Gregory himself, right? That is something that's not explicable, something that's chaotic, something that's random, despite all of the architectonics that have been marshaled to prove that he's thought of it all, and it's all quite reasonable, right? That two lines, nor public men, drove to the tumult in the clouds. A lonely impulse of delight drove to this tumult in the cloud. Those two lines, they don't have anaphor. They don't have antithesis.
Yeah. You
know what other two lines don't have anaphor and don't have antithesis? The first two lines. The first time he mentions the clouds, it's not in this rational architectonic formation. The last time he mentions the clouds, it's not in this rational architectonic formation. There's a balance of what doesn't subscribe to balance, if you like, a balance of the unbalanced in the relationship between those lines 1 and 2 and lines that's 11 and 12. Yeah, 11 and 12. Right. So I'm just saying.
Wow.
I'm just so. I mean, what you and I talked when we started before we were looking at this poem, and you asked me one of the reasons I'm interested in this poem. Okay, so I think that one of the reasons I got interested in this poem before the reprisals, I was interested in this poem precisely because of what we were talking about earlier. The idea that I think that Yeats is a poet who outstrips ideas with affect and is about trying to capture an affect that is always more complicated, always more intricate than simple ideas will allow you to believe. Right? And I think that what gets framed in here is something like the ineffable, right? That lonely impulse of delight. And so, and I think that Yeats is interested in, the effability of the ineffable, if you like. That is, how can we make things that we can't put into words? How can we yield them from a verbal construction that doesn't actually say them? If you see what I'm saying. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I see exactly what you're saying. It's I mean, I think you're helping to explain why when I teach this poem, I find it incredibly moving, and I think students register it as incredibly moving, even though as we work through the poem, I end up talking about a lot of the historical contexts, or maybe I'll go into tragic joy with Nietzsche, or I'll talk about the Irish historical context, talk about Gregory, Yeats's relationship with Gregory, I'll go to his biographical stuff, and yet all of those explanations about the poem do not capture or do not do justice to the feeling we have with this poem, as if it is articulating something that all of those other sort of descriptions are skirting around, but not getting toward. There's a kind of core of that poem, and I think it is right there in that pulse. Like, what is that feeling that is unique, right? And and yet registering, we have a sense of that, right? We all have a sense of these impulses, but it's for another, it exceeds our ideation of it, our sort of logical understanding of it, or our ability to put it into public concepts that are shareable in a really transparent way.
I think that I want to say, I mean, and I totally agree with that. I do think that there is an historical condition that doesn't explain what's the feeling, or doesn't explain what's going on in the poem, but does explain how Yeats gets to this. And I think it begins with an Irish airman, because that's a very loaded.
Right.
To say he's an Irish airman, well, there wasn't an Irish Air Force, right? He's fighting, as an officer of the UK, right? And this becomes important in reprisals, right?
Right.
Fighting as an officer in the UK, and what Yeats can't and won't spin this he wants to spin it in entirely other terms than the way we usually think about military heroism. I think part of that is what cause is he serving? What would the heroism be for? I think that Yeats himself is in an odd position, because he's clearly a nationalist on the one hand, and he's clearly enamored of a form of life, that is associated with the ascendancy and with the settler class, and so with colonialism. So I mean, I think that there's a reason he says my country is Kiltartan Cross, right? He's trying to remove Gregory from the entire, right? And country is such a nice dodge. It's not nation,
right?
It's
not the nation.
It's the countryside. It's like my country.
Right.
It doesn't go to. It replaces geopolitics with geography, is what it does.
Right.
And so there's Yeats is figuring out a way of celebrating by creating emotion around, celebrating what Gregory has done in terms that will not only not assert some kind of national purpose, but will avoid it, and will do all it can to avoid it. Right. So not to turn it into actually something that serves any particular national agenda. He wants to remove Gregory from, I mean, this is 1918, right? This is when he writes this poem, 1918. Conscription's still a hot button issue, right? Sinn Féin is ascendant, right? Gregory's fighting the Germans, the people who supplied Pierce and the boys with arms in the Rising, right? I mean, this is fraught. All I'm saying is just an Irish airman, just the word Irish there, given the whole context, is incredibly fraught. And I think that Yeats, part of what Yeats is doing here is removing Gregory from the tangle that involves, right? Right. And I think probably misrepresenting Gregory's own reasons, right? I mean, I don't think Yeats finally cares particularly why Gregory did what he did. I don't think that's not the point here. But I do think that this gets him into this space, which for Yeats is an important space. It's an important space that affect exceed conceptualization, in part because that's the space that also is going to exceed for Yeats the political, or at least the geopolitical, right? So that's what I think.
That's brilliant, and I think that's and I like the way that helps. I mean, it helps me to think a little bit about approaching this poem and the value of setting up that kind of geopolitical context and thinking it through a bit, and then seeing how the poem responds to it, and then moving toward this other sort of space, this other way of being that I think is crucially Yeats. And it gets at, again, it does get at why the poem often affects us so powerfully.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's it's the particularity of the emotional prompt combined with the universalization of the feeling or the feelings, the complex feelings that the prompt evokes. Right. I mean, it's a very particular situation. It's a very directed poem. It's so focused, but its focus leads you to this incredibly malleable affective state,
Right.
right? That is overwhelming and but also just various in where it can take you. This poem takes me different places on different occasions. I mean, I
Yes.
don't,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
it's
Well, and that's, it's interesting too that what you're showing here is, often when I'm talking with students and we get into these ideas of affect, and it seems they sometimes think about it in terms of power, in the sense of the force of the affect, that the quality is in the force of whatever the affect is. The stronger that force, the more moving the poem. But what you showed really brilliantly is that it's totally crafted. Like it's made through the language and sound qualities of the way he's generating sound in this poem, the way he's framing these antitheses and using chiasmus and those little exceptions we have there. So it's not a sort of just romantic kind of thing. It's really crafted, and it gets to how poetry sort of works as craft, which I think is
but
brilliant.
this is why I think Yeats is so, for me, just for me, is the ideal poet to teach people how to
Yeah.
read poetry.
Yeah.
Because, for one thing, he's quite insistent on using, innovating on, tweaking, but using the guardrails, the
Mm-hmm.
kind of traditional guardrails of
Mm-hmm.
poetry, right? Your rhyme scheme, your rhythmic patterns, your uses of assonance and alliteration, your uses of certain kinds of verse forms. I mean, he's really interested in what we can make of them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is to say, he's really interested in speaking the language of poetry, not translating the language of poetry into something else that we'll
Yeah,
call poetry.
yeah, that's
Right?
right. That's right. That's right. It differentiates him from some of the other poets from that period. Let's go to reprisals then.
Yeah, and interesting because reprisals, I think, one of the things about reprisals that's so interesting. Um, well, if one of the things that's so interesting is all of the stuff that Irish Airmen said Gregory wasn't about kind of comes back here. You
Right.
know, um,
Right.
some 19 German planes, they say, you had brought down before you died. We called it a good death. Well, in that last poem, how many planes he brought down was completely beside the point, right? Totally irrelevant, right? And later on, you know, to certain second thoughts have come upon the cause you served. Wait a minute. Where were the first thoughts upon the cause he served? There were no thoughts in that last poem upon the cause he served,
And
right?
I love the certain, that's Yeats, the certain, we find that in a couple of moments in Yeats, but there's certain second thoughts.
But this is a classic. This too is classic Yeats, the reprisals, in that I have found that Yeats' career as a poet, as it progresses, becomes increasingly a poetry of self-citation,
Mhm.
self-qualification. Sometimes, I mean, that line where he says, when we disagree with ourselves, we make poetry. That
Mhm.
that actually, it's a great line, but more than a great line, it actually defines the kind of arc of his career, which is ever more towards self-citation, self-qualification, self-correction, right? And this is a poem where the reprisals that the poem involves go in multiple directions. I mean, there's the reprisals of the Black and Tans against the Irish. There's the reprisal of Gregory, of Yeats in Gregory's name against the empire, the Black and Tans, right?
Mhm.
There's the reprisal, I think, against Gregory himself, and we'll get to where I think that becomes apparent. And I think there's a reprisal against Yeats. Yeats's reprisal against his own imagining of Gregory in An Irish Airman Foresees His Death.
That's
And I
fascinating.
think that, and
And
I think
just
reprisal also goes with reprise because we're gonna do this again,
right, right.
right? And if I could just point to the rhyme scheme, because this is the first thing that I think is like really just, I just love this stuff. The rhyme scheme in Irish Airman Foresees' death, everything is a true rhyme. There's not one rhyme that isn't a true rhyme in Irish Airman Foresees' death. In this poem, you have true rhymes right until the line, till certain second thoughts have come, which is a slant rhyme with tune.
Mm,
and
yeah.
after you get the second thoughts, and after all, this poem is the second thoughts, right? After you get the second thoughts, you get there are interspersed slant rhymes, and by the end, you have the rhyme "heed" and "dead," which is so slant it's almost not a rhyme at all.
Yeah.
So the rhyme scheme, I think that the rhyme scheme in an Irish Airman, I think, was consistent with the idea that everything was thought through and everything was in order, even though you were containing the opposite of that. Here, I think second thoughts are precisely the thoughts that prove to you, to demonstrate to the speaker, and should demonstrate to Gregory, that everything's not in order, right? And everything, maybe you didn't think this through as well as you might have, right? And I think that it's important that you start out. First of all, you'll notice, right? They say, we called it, you said, we imagined, right? The poem casts the event not in terms of the event, casts the event in terms of what was thought and reported about it, right? So that you have it's a mediated representation of what Gregory was about, right? Which is to say, it invites you to doubt it, right? And the by starting out with some 19 German planes, they say, you had brought down before you died, we called it a good death. I mean, Gregory won the cross, right?
Right.
The military cross. So basically what it starts out doing is holding him as a member of the UK armed forces. Basically, that's what this is about, right? This isn't about you not hating who you fight, not loving, right? You brought down German planes for the UK. Okay. So he sets that up as, okay, that's why people thought it was a good death. So the reason for that, though, is who's killing the people back at Cool, right? Who's killing the people back at Cool? Your comrades in arms, right? I mean, that's what makes this so, that's what gives this poem its punch, right? So you thought your last exciting year outweighed all other years, you said, right? That qualifies. You said it. We're not buying it, right?
Yeah.
So battle joy may be so dear a memory, even to the dead, it chases all other thought away. Yet rise from your Italian tomb, flit to Kiltartan Cross. Okay, flit is a version of fly. He's got Gregory flying again, only he's reversing course. Gregory was in Kiltartan Cross, my country, and he flew to fight Germans. Now he's dead. He's saying, fly back, reverse course. And this whole poem is a reversal of course, right? So the fight is going to be a reversal of course. And stay there at Kiltartan Cross. I want you to stay there till certain second thoughts have come upon the cause you served. And so he's basically saying what the other poem didn't say. And he's kind of belying his earlier poem. He served a cause, right? This was the cause he served, right? I tried to make it like he didn't serve a cause. He only served his own, mysterious internal promptings, right? Could have been what Lacanian jouissance. It could have been death drive. It could have been anything. No, he served a cause, right? That we imagined. And Yeats not only, to be fair to Yeats, he includes himself in the complicity that he is now, right? We imagined such a fine
affair.
Fine affair. I can see the silver on the table. Like, cool. A fine affair, right? Okay. So I'm going to say, half drunk or whole mad soldiery are murdering your tenants there. Now, these soldiers are half drunk or they're whole mad. What are they experiencing? They're, and notice, drunk, mad, soldiery, murdering. Murdering summarizes the vowel in drunk. It alliterates with the M in mad. It brings together the two R's from soldiery. So you have the sound is gathering. Half drunk or whole mad soldier are murdering your tenants there. What are they experiencing? It seems to me like they're experiencing something like battle joy, right? The battle joy that he said before, right? Though battle joy may be so dear a memory, even to the dead. What is battle joy? It's like some kind of ecstasy in overwhelming aggression, right? It's an ecstasy of violence. And isn't that so it's not just your comrades in arms, not just your comrades in arms, they're actually being prompted by something like the same thing that you said you were prompted by. Battle joy, right? Are murdering your tenants there. Okay, so now this is the moment, it seems to me, in the poem where the reprisal becomes clear, because Yeats knew, right? And once again, Yeats is enamored. Yeats idealizes, as he knows Gregory idealizes. Robert, I don't know, I'm not making the claim for Augusta, but for Robert, idealizes an ascendancy way of life, the kind of quasi-feudalism that Ireland was still featuring, right? And he knows what that quasi-feudalism, he knows what the contract is. The tenants sustain your opulence. The tenants sustain your leisure. And you protect your tenants.
Yes, yeah. And this
you
is
guard your.
I mean, this is Burkean. I mean, this gets back to the very basics of
the basic thing. And you're not there. Why? Because you're dead. Why are you dead? Because you decided you wanted battle joy, or because you decided the UK was a good thing to fight for? Whatever the reason, it doesn't look so good at death anymore. And he emphasizes that. He goes beyond it when he says, men that revere your father yet are shot at on the open plain. This isn't just a contract. This is a commitment to tradition. This is a commitment to alliance, to affiliation that was anchored by respect, deference, protection, right? Yeah. These guys maintain what he's saying is these guys maintain the code.
They bought it.
They maintain the code. And there they are, shot at by your comrades in arms. Okay. Right. So I want to go, and then we get, of course, the historical event that that triggers this, the murder of Eileen Quinn. Okay. But if we go back, just want to go back for a second. Although your last exciting year outweighed all other years, you said, that outweighed is clearly an allusion to Irish Airman. Because Irish Airman was all about balancing, weighing this against that, right? And coming and saying in balance, nothing weighed in the balance with this life, this death, right? So he's clearly speaking to Irish Airmen at that point, and he's going to come back and speak to at this point. Armed men may murder them in passing by, nor law nor parliament take heed, right? That law that didn't bid you fight, right? Those public men that didn't bid you fight, well, they're not taking any account of the fact that these people on your land, your countrymen, the people in your estate, remember, your country is Kiltartan Cross. It's your estate, right? This is your countrymen. Your comrades in arms are killing your country, right? Right. So that's a clear allusion to that. It's when you think about it, it's a cunning allusion, because I'll translate it into my idiom. Okay. He said, nor law nor duty bade me fight. And duty is exactly what's not being upheld here. And Yeats says, nor law nor parliament take heed. And I say, Yeats is saying to Gregory, you didn't think of that, did you, when you were thinking of everything? Right? Apparently, everything was not thought of in advance. Right?
There's no balance.
Right, there's no balance here. Then you get to that last line. Then close your ears with dust and lie among the other cheated dead. And that's really interesting, because there's a period after heed. Right? Which means that the last line is an unrhymed couplet. Now, lie rhymes with by, but dead doesn't rhyme with heed. It doesn't rhyme with anything. The line is left kind of dangling, right? I mean, there's the sense of majestic closure that was the Irish airman's last words, and balance with this life, this death, right? You still have dead, right? But instead of death as like a mode of majestic closure, you have the cheated dead. You know, dead is a disappointing, to say the least, endpoint, right? And I believe that this is the second time he's made this gesture. I mean, I'm sure you remember the end of To a Shade, Parnell,
Yes.
when he brings Parnell back, and then says, never mind.
You're better off. Yeah.
You're right. You're right. So he's sending Gregory away. But here, lie, I think, because of its proximity to cheat, right, has to not only mean lie down, but it has to resonate of the lie.
Yeah.
Well, now there's the geopolitical lie, which was the British lie that they were fighting the Germans on behalf of small countries, which the Black and Tans were giving the lie to every day. Right. And there's the lie that was implicit in the Anglo-Irish Airman Foresees' death, right? That you know, this wasn't as it seemed there. You weren't what you seemed there, right? There's that sense of that. Last thing. To return to Helen Venn, the doyen of close reading. She points out that at the beginning, we said this, all right, I just want to repeat it. Beginning of Irish Airman, right? He looks up, sees his destiny, but it's cloudy. So then as the poem goes on, he takes off, so that in the end, he's in this tumult in the clouds, and he's considering this life, this death, and he reaches an apotheosis. And the apotheosis, the commitment to some kind of self-abandon, is up in the air. It's on the heights, at the meridian, right? And he claims this is the meridian. Nothing stands with this. Nothing with. Look at this poem. He starts out up in the air, but then when you get second thoughts, back, you have to bring them up. You have to make them rise. And so with the second thoughts, he rises, right? But in the end, he's not only on the ground, he's back under the ground, right? So if the Irish Airman is a taking off into the and staying at the heights, this is a crashing. This is a coming down, right? And so they meet, right? And Yeats, I think, became increasingly interested in this kind of spatial pairing. Think Lapis Lazuli, which ends on the heights, and then The Man in the Echo, which ends in the, which ends in the cavern, in the pit, right? He's really interested in playing with this kind of spatial.
Lie down and die. I mean, there's all. Yeah, I mean, that is amazing. I can't believe that I have been teaching an Irish Airman Foresees' death for years, and mentioning reprisals as a kind of afterthought, like something you could check out if you felt like it. Or, by the way, he wrote this other poem, which Lady Gregory didn't really like. She was worried about it being too political. It was never published, didn't come out till, I think it was 1948. It never came out. And it was a kind of afterthought. And I'm realizing after this conversation, what the heck am I doing? Like, those poems perfectly, they fit so well.
I have to say though, Rob, what I've thought is, what the heck was Yeats doing? Yeah. That is, I just don't. I mean, I can understand when he first wrote this poem, and Lady Gregory had the objection she had, and they're friends, and you do things for friends, including shutting up. But what I don't understand is when he was arranging everything to be the collected poems at the end of his life, why he didn't include this right after Irish Airman in what Wild Swans, and Wild Swans a cool collection, right? That's one and two. I don't understand that he let it go and let it, not be part of the official oeuvre. I mean, obviously it's part of the oeuvre, but not be part of the official oeuvre, given its intimate relationship to the Irish Airman Foresees' death. And given the way, and the poems also, Irish Airman's Foreseeing, and Reprisals is Reviewing. Right. I mean, they come together in so many ways,
Fascinating that how much Wild Swans, how that inclusion would change Wild Swans.
It really
seeing that
would.
whole reprisals right after, especially we had In Memory of Major Robert Gregory, because in some ways that I always thought of in Irish Airman is a kind of distillation of In Memory of Major, which In Memory of Major Robert Gregory, by the way, I don't really like as a poem all that much. I think it's a little bit too Baroque. In fact, I had a seminar with Richard Finneran one time, who, I don't know if he's right about this, but he thought the whole poem was kind of ironic, and that there was a sort of mockery of Robert Gregory underpinning it. I don't know if it'd go that far, but that whole, soldier, scholar, horseman, the whole thing, and then the beautiful distillation we get in Irish Airman. But if you add reprisals, it changes that whole experience of that arc of those three poems, which are
I
really.
don't know if I agree with Finneran about it being ironic in the classic sense, like he's Byron or something.
Right.
But my wife has a saying about certain people: they don't have any control over their unconscious. And I think that in this poem, in the Memory of Major, you might argue that Yeats didn't fully have control over his unconscious when it came to Gregory.
I do think there are moments, and that's why that poem always, I never quite like it. It feels so it feels like, and I think that was one of the few poems that he wrote on, if not the only one, they sort of wrote on command, where, Augusta Gregory said, you gotta write something. And so there is a kind of element of compulsion there. So yeah, I don't think it's got I don't think Richard's right of the full-on irony, and he was really pushing it. I think he was trying to be mischievous and sort of provocative in the class.
But it is the case that Gregory has, because if Yeats is this subject who is politically divided between his nationalist impulses and his love for the kind of culture, the kind of cultural edifice that the ascendancy had produced, which you see all the way, even, you get to Purgatory in 1938, and he's still bewailing the loss of homes that he started bewailing in 1909 with upon a house shaken by land agitation, right? So he's divided between these two things. And I think his relationship to Augusta Gregory was such that he could be happily divided. But I think Robert Gregory was more like, if you affiliate too closely with him, then you've gone over the edge. You've gone over the edge. Yeats wanted to maintain a relation. I can't find it again. I just saw it a couple days ago. I was reading something that Yeats wrote, where he wants to maintain a distinction between the ascendancy and the garrison, which is a distinction, which is a fragile freaking distinction. But I think that in some ways, Augusta Gregory was the ascendancy for Yeats, and the ascendancy could be nationalistic, and you could think of the ascendancy as going back through Flood and Grattan and Parnell and Jonathan Swift and Burke, right? And think of them as nationalists, right? You couldn't, but Robert Gregory, I think, was more like the garrison,
right.
And so more stood for maintaining the kind of status quo of that.
Well, listen, Joe, that was absolutely brilliant. I wish I want to take a class with you. I want to drive up to Buffalo and take a whole class with you. That was so illuminating. I always learn so much in these conversations, and that was, really eye-opening. I loved every second of it. I so appreciate you coming and joining us to talk about this, and that was a blast. So,
well, Rob, let me say this. If you ever want to have a conversation, and not necessarily, I'm not saying Yeats's conversation. I'm not saying you have to record it or anything. I'm just saying, if you ever want to have a conversation, I love talking about Yeats. I'm obsessed with Yeats at this point. I'm just like, it's what I think about. And so, anytime you want to, we can get together sometime, we're not that far apart.
We're not that far away. So we will do that. It was great talking to you. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye, Ron.